Hello, everybody, and good to see you, Chris.
Good to see you.
We're really grateful that you're here. I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And when we first started Embrace Fully way back in 2020, we really didn't know a lot about the reentry work. We just knew that people coming out of prison who'd been working with a Christian Science volunteer chaplain, that those folks would need practical nursing help and resources and a community embrace in order, to navigate their way back into society. And our teachers in this work, were and are the men and women coming out of prison who commit themselves to our care, and they basically teach us about their needs. No individual has ever been, there's just always a difference. Every single person coming out, we always have to learn something brand new to keep up. And but at one point, we just thought we were the only one setting up angel teams in different cities, but now we know we're not the only ones. And much to our surprise, we recently discovered Underground Ministries, and they're a program located north of Seattle, Washington. And I just visited with Chris and some of his team. Quite an amazing organization that they have. Their website is very interesting and well worth looking at, undergroundministries.org. And anyway, we just couldn't wait to meet them and to see what they were doing and to see what we could learn and share, and how we might possibly help each other. And tonight we have Chris Hoke, who's founder and executive director of Underground Ministries, and he's here with us. So Embrace Fully has what we call angel teams. And Underground Ministries has what they call One Parish One Prisoner. So we're somewhat on similar paths, so this will be good. So if you're a member of one of our angel teams or want to be a member, I hope you take notes, because there's much we can all learn from Chris. And that said, hello again, Chris.
David, it's so good to be here. Thank you so much for your flexibility. We had quite an ordeal tonight, but I'm really happy to join you. I don't know if you all know, but David came up here to Washington last month, and we got to spend a lot of time together. And I'm fascinated to learn more about how Embrace Fully works and how similar our operations are.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to working with you too. And but thank you so much for, I know you had an emergency, so this is really great that you're here. Briefly, let's just get into it here. Well, what's your background and how did you get involved in ministry work?
All right. Well, I did not think I'd be working with churches. I'll start there because I grew up over churched in Southern California. My grandparents were missionaries that began a seminary in Tokyo. My dad grew up as a missionary kid in Tokyo. My grandfather worked with Billy Graham to do like global mission stuff. My dad worked with global missions. I grew up in a very intense Southern California megachurch kind of evangelical environment. And I heard the stories of Jesus a lot, is the good side of being over churched. That no matter all the weird sauce on the taco that can be placed, at least you hear the meat, you hear the red letters, you hear the scriptures. And so this story of Jesus walking with the outcasts, not having a home, befriending the untouchables, getting in fights with religious leaders, healing folks, raising the dead, that sounded badass. So when they asked us little kids if we wanted to follow this guy, I was like, of course. But then I think all through junior high and high school, I started to see that following Jesus, I think, was a code for just be a good white Republican who doesn't sleep with his girlfriend. And I was good at that. I was good at that. I was good at all the things, but I realized churches are not places to help people live out this very radical story. Ended up doing a program after high school in East Oakland in some of the most violent neighborhoods. And I went to, instead of an evangelical college, I went to UC Berkeley, which was a little different. But I was haunted by the Jesus stories, and I wrote all my papers, wrote nonviolent social change and sociology of poverty, existential philosophy, about what still haunted me in the Jesus story, that led me to study with a liberation theologian in the far northwest of Washington State, who was working with migrant farm workers, normally folks from Oaxaca, who were in the berry and potato and cucumber picking fields here in the Skagit Valley. And he was leading kind of liberation theology style dialogical Bible studies in the jail. And I thought, that sounds right. That's where I want to study theology. I don't want to go back to the ivory tower. So when I moved up here, I was lonely.
Yeah.
And I went to the jail and do these Bible study circles in a cold cinder block room with a lot of men coming in just wearing red scrubs and their toes, there no gel or product in their hair and their toes sticking out of orange, humiliating rubber used slippers. And in these places, we prayed together and we read the stories of the gospel night after night. And they got it. It was especially the guys who were my age that had a lot of tattoos and very colorful language, who were hilarious. And so I didn't do a majors in college around gangs and understanding gangs, but gang members kind of adopted me. And they invited me to do pastor visits with them. And I said, cool it with the pastor word. And they said, fuck that, dog, you're our pastor. And so I kind of got ordained by gang members, and they invited me to their quinceañeras and to their court dates. And they invited me into their stories. And there was a level of friendship. It took me a while before I could use the F word going on between me and some of these guys that definitely had a pastoral shape to it, but there was more laughter and tears and, I don't know, emotional safety, ironically, with violent felons, and less toxic masculinity in the sense that they were able to weep and cry and tell me about things and ask and be willing to hold my hands and pray together in ways that none of my hipster friends would at any of the bars over IPAs ever would. So I think I just love these guys as my community.
Where did the idea for One Parish, One Prisoner that matches an inmate with a faith-based group, where did that come from?
Well, I wrote a book and we started traveling and telling stories of friendship and helping my friend get out of the tombs of prison. And we're learning about mass incarceration, a national epidemic far larger than kind of our stories in the far Northwest. And a little old lady, after our very first time we spoke at a large Episcopalian church, gave me this factoid that there were roughly the same amount of churches in Washington state as there were folks in a Washington Department of Corrections. And she had this typed up little piece of paper that said, what if every church, I forget the language, adopted one person coming home? And at first I thought that was just kind of cute. But as we were at conferences at Vanderbilt and in Duke and in New York about how the church can interrupt mass incarceration, I started thinking, wow, a church has everything someone needs coming home. They don't need to be experts. It's relationship, it's belongings. They don't need an agency. They have a used car. They know someone that has a business that could hire them through trust, through relationship. They have plenty of finances in that place to pay off LFOs. And they have plenty of experience raising kids and navigating appointments and insurance. Everyone could do that but they'd have to love them. So they'd have to write letters and build a relationship for a good year or so before release. And they'd have to trust each other. And so we started piloting an idea to have a church put a team together, maybe 7 people, and to pair with someone that fully understood what the idea was in prison a year before release, but releasing to that county. And we paired them and they started writing letters, and they were shy in writing letters. So I started to write like a learning module, like what's a good way to write a letter to really get to a place of mutuality and understand each other's stories fast. And that turned into, as I worked with the first 3 pilot teams, and then we launched 9 and the pandemic happened, which helped me meet with 15 teams via Zoom around the state. And so it just started to grow from there.
So let me ask you this. How do you recruit an inmate from the prison in Washington? I mean, how does that work?
Well, at first, I just had like 15, 16 years worth of a deep roster of folks that I loved. Half my parishes and prisons across the state. And so I could already kind of look at, okay, I've got this big Jesuit church in Seattle, this little rural Methodist church, and this suburban Presbyterian church in these different counties. And I knew some of the guys that might be from those counties. And so I could, through my own relationship with folks on the inside, start to pair them. Then we started to put together a really thick application. Then the application got very thin because we didn't want to intimidate them like you need to be enough. It was really, are you releasing the next year or 2?
Hmm.
You want to build relationships with absolute strangers. We didn't advertise any of like how they'd fundraise. So it's no resource. It's about, do you want to build relationships? Do you want a support team that's totally your own, that care about you? They don't work for an agency or the government. They just want to care about you. Would you like that?
Wow.
And we thought we'd need to bring a lot of videos and go inside and really answer a lot of questions. We thought a lot of guys and men, women would be very skeptical. The applications just started pouring in by word of mouth and photocopied by their neighbors and their cellies. So we've consistently over the last 5 years, we have about 70 to 100 fresh and vetted applications that we can't keep up finding churches for.
Wow. How do you pair somebody with the church, though? So what does somebody in the inside say? Well, I want to go to a various type of Christian church or a Muslim?
Rarely. Oftentimes folks on the in the application is very clear this is not a religious program. We say this is, you don't have to go to church.
Explain that a little bit, because that's interesting, because you got parishes or churches and you're not a religious program. Explain that.
It says on the application, this is not a religious program.
Yeah.
This is about relationships. And so we help recruit communities based in their church belonging, and this helps them go deeper in their faith. So much of our spiritual formation is really about a deeper transformational curriculum for the team. And so we say you don't have to go to church. Their goal is to get out of the church and to be the church to you and in the community. And that you don't have to believe anything else, but it's going to change what you all believe as you step out of your comfort zones and learn each other's stories and love one another. And so oftentimes folks, it doesn't attract necessarily devout folks who are in prison. The application is framed in such a way that folks are just saying long form answers. Why do you want to get to know new people in your life? And the devastating and vulnerable things they write in their first application about how many bridges they've burned, how many people they're ashamed to even bump into at a gas station if they even get home to their home county, how much they would love it if someone would look past their fences and forgive them upon hello and give them a chance to prove who they really can be inside. Beautiful applications. Every once in a while, the worst applications we throw out are the ones that are saying, I've been born again since I was 15, and I know this verse and this chapter and this verse. And it's like, this person has used religion as a caked on makeup system. And this is going to be so much work for us to see who they really are.
Wow. To see who they really are. So you're really looking for people, I mean, obviously, and you're getting people who are extraordinarily honest. How does that work with a church? Maybe a white church that's just not used to lots of tattoos and lots of F words and lots of all kinds of other stuff that's coming out of a prison. How do you help a church kind of get ready for something they may not be ready for?
Baby steps and relationship. Our kickoff orientate we normally begin, reaching out to pastors because they're at least on staff and they can, answer an email, and they would be the ones kind of inviting this program into their church. And so from the leadership, it begins with oftentimes church pastors are wanting to find some way of going deeper with their congregants, some way of connecting missionally with their community. Especially a lot of mainline denominations in America, they're aware of mass incarceration. Americans are aware of mass incarceration. They just don't know what they can do. They already have a job. They have a life. But when there's an invitation like, hey, you can walk with one person. You have to even go do prison ministry. This person's releasing to your town, whether you help them or not. Would you like to get to know them for a year as a team with 7 other people? Commitments just for about 5 hours a month, an hour and a half meeting, about 45 minutes of reading the module, about 2 hours or more of a letter or 2 a month. And then you graduate to phone calls, then maybe drive out to that prison and get on their visiting list. Then you start putting a release plan together. It might grow to be 6 or 7 hours a month, but by then they stop counting because they love this person. And then I think once we start them the kickoff orientation, the first thing they do before they leave is they write their first letter. And Father Greg Boyle of One Parish One Ministries was really key in that with us. He's just like, you never want to call it a training, Chris, because that works against your purpose. Because people will always say, well, I need more training, or I don't know enough, I'm not qualified. He's like, people know how to love one another. Whatever you build, Chris, it needs to be something that fast tracks them into what they already know how to do. And then you're slowly supplying them what tools they need along the journey.
Mm.
And so they write their first letter, and right away, the sweetness, the direct human contact, the vulnerability within they get their first letter back in a week or two, normally from their incarcerated partner who's eager to write back. That's more real than all the other fears, stereotypes, tattoos, all that stuff. It's just like cobwebs. It disappears in the very real incarnation of a real relationship.
Mm. How do you deal with a church though that might go, okay, sign us up, and then they kind of get into the process and they go, maybe this is just too much to swallow or too much to do. Have you ever had that happen? Or
Yeah.
how do you avoid that from happening? How do you help a church kind of like really prepare for something it's really uniquely different?
Yeah, good question. There's two or three different places where that shows up that we've seen over the last several years. And by the way, we just launched our 70th team in Washington this week.
Wow, that's fantastic.
So
you
yeah,
have 70, let me just back up so I understand that. You have 70 churches matched up with 70 former inmates.
Yeah.
Right this second.
Well, I mean, the first 30 or so of them have like already completed an over 2-year journey in that person's home, and they're not active within the 2-year program.
Oh, okay.
But we've launched our 70th pairing.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, in one way, it feels we're really excited. Another way, it's like, well, that's out of the 12,000 or so churches and inmates. Like, we've only begun. So some of the things we've learned is the flakiness and the fear in communities and in churches is the first thing that we face, which is not even getting an email back. Christ knocks on the door in the form of the prisoner in a program that's actually reaching out to the church and rolling out the red carpet in a kind of a dummy proof 2-year journey of relationship with someone coming home, and people don't even open the door. When people start getting interested, then it's like, oh, this is great. And they realize there's a commitment. It's not just something to be pulpit supply on a Sunday morning when they're on vacation. Then there's all sorts of responses like, oh gosh, you know what? This sounds great. Now's not the right time is kind of the theme. It's, we've got, Lent is coming up, and we've got, that's going to be a haul. And then it's everyone's about to leave for the summer, and in Washington, everyone kind of disappears during our 2.5 months of sunshine and vacation. We're all getting back from school, from summer, and you can kind of get this kind of like by the calendar year, the kind of cluster of church busyness excuses. So that's a big one. But once a church finally says, okay, let's do this, we come and we speak, people come out of the woodwork and they want to do this. And they sign up and we register them, we kick it off. But one of the things we've had to build early on is the idea of covenant. And so I've kind of relearned a lot of biblical tradition and why it's necessary by actually trying to organize communities. Like, oh, people are flaky. People with good intentions suck at following through on their best promises. So in an American secular world, we call it a contract. So the businesses don't flake out and you sign on the dotted line. But it's not a contract. There's an older tradition in the Bible of covenant, which is kind of like a promise of the heart. It's kind of like a wedding before, lawyers got involved and before the state and finances got involved, between two people with other promises saying, I'm going to struggle with this promise, but damn it, I want to do this. And before other witnesses, I'm making this commitment. Please hold me to it. So we have a covenant that they signed at the beginning that says, this is going to be a hard journey. And the goal is not to do a successful reentry. This person might relapse. They might break our heart. Our hearts will always be broken by something. My life might get busy just short of there being like some life disaster where the team blesses me. We're all promising to one another on this team and to our incarcerated friend. So it's a four-part covenant. We're promising everyone on our team. We're promising to our person that we're making this commitment to leaving prison. We're making this commitment to God. And by the way, we're also making this commitment to Underground Ministries, who's accompanying us through this. We want to learn how to be faithful, and to, through thick and thin, through the next 2 years, we want to unlearn flakiness with faithfulness.
What about the idea, though, that you're really not just talking about, we're working with you for the 2 years that you're incarcerated. What about the long-term nature of the commitment when somebody comes out? Because that's not 2 years, that's forever.
No, so it's generally the 2 years generally. I mean, it's always a little different. It's but about a year before release, and then a year after release is the way the 24-month program goes.
Okay.
And the idea, which is stated in the second module, is that we quote one of our friends who got out. He was home for like maybe 2 months and got a job and got his driver's license. And they had like a barbecue, and one of the ladies on the team said, I'm so glad you're home and you're doing great. We're ready for our next one. And he called me or texted me and was just like, I think it's really cool they want to help more people, but fuck, Chris, like I thought we were in this for a long walk together.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of quoted him in that module and welcoming them early on to say, if you do this right, you won't notice that you've passed 24 months. That this is really welcoming someone home, and they're part of the community, their relationship, and that the program is really just a launch pad or training wheels. It's something that's temporary that launches you into, by the end, you don't need to wonder if you're doing the program, because and so that's kind of the goal, is that the heavy lifting of reentry work is there in the first 3 or 4 months, and then there's a lot of shared learning. And sometimes churches have been like, well, they're doing great, Chris, we really think we can do another team. And to the few churches that really want to do that, we've said, one, if you do a second team, it's a whole 7 new people. So that way more of the congregation has their own relationships, and that person looks like they're doing great right now, but just wait. And oftentimes there's triggers in life, there's old pains come back, they slide back into addiction, they make a mistake, they go back to jail, they lose their job, their wife leaves them, their husband leaves them. And that's when they come back and realize, oh, I wasn't just a reentry project. These are people that care about me and I can keep coming to. Because so much of recidivism is also just, life is hard for the poor and the wounded. And that without ongoing, reliable systems that have civic muscle and faithful hearts.
So the 24 modules, can you just give us a clue on, that sounds awfully critical here. Give us a clue about what's involved in those modules.
Well, the first one is called The Lost Art of Letter Writing.
That's obviously regarding, we're going to be writing letters back and forth. We're going to be communicating. So here's some starter ideas on how to write letters.
Yeah, there's even a story about, I don't know if everyone knows who Madeleine L'Engle is. She's an American fantasy writer and a spiritual writer of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And she's a person from kind of like the Christian literature scene. A thoughtful person. She wrote a Wind in the Door, and A Wrinkle in Time, and that kind of stuff. But someone connected her with a pen pal in the 80s who was a political prisoner with the Black Panthers. And this was in an article in Vanity Fair, and it was just a beautiful story of their pen pal relationship and how different they are and how their relationships changed, both of them. So we want to get into it not in just a, hey, here's a color by numbers social work project, but really this is the stuff of literature. This is the stuff of Netflix series and Oscar-winning movies. This is the texture of our lives. So we really want to romance people into the beauty of what this is, as well as some prompts. We have about 7 or 8 prompts for some letters that can write, like your why. Start with the why. Why did you want to do this? Get right to it. Both of us are suspicious of each other's motives. Might as well just put your cards on the table. Yep. Another one is, what's a day in the life of your life look like? And so you've got some ladies talking about their retired husband, and they're working in the garden, and they hope their grandkids come over next week, but they're a little bit lonely. And you've got another guy talking about like walking the main line and the tier, and when there's mail call out, and they might get transferred next month, and might not get access to mail for 3 weeks. Just completely different worlds. So that's the first module. And the second one is called Success ? And that goes into some really beautiful material by Father Greg Boyle from his book Tattoos on the Heart, of really saying faithfulness is our goal. And so right away, we're kind of like disarming the team from performance anxiety, disarming the team from an unreflected white savior mentality of, I just want to do good. I just can't mess up on this. But when people want to have successful results, they end up putting a lot of pressure on the person they want to love. And it can kind of become unintentionally controlling. And you're so afraid of failing as a white do-gooder that you end up not allowing the person you're loving to struggle. And so let them know in that first one that pressure's off. Your goal is only to be faithful. They might go back to jail. What does faithfulness look like now?
So the 24 months, are those 24 modules, are those laid out in a way that this is kind of how it's going to go, and this is what you can expect along the module path? Is that,
so
that correct?
There's an online kind of like menu. I've tried to stay away from the learning management systems. If anyone's had to do online learning with like linear courses to check off, I hate them. So I built kind of my own LMS within Squarespace, where it's kind of choose your own adventure. It's laid out in like a somewhat typical order. The first few months of letters, trust, lost art of building trust, talking about money, boundaries, codependency, expectations of one another. One called The Gates of Hades, where we're looking at both a theology of God that breaks into the realm of the dead. And that's what we're up against sociologically with mass incarceration, and how hard it's going to be to get letters in and out, how hard it's going to be to set up a visit. And when you go into these facilities and get on visiting lists and dealing with correctional systems, it's going to be painful. It's going to piss you off. That's good. That means you're paying attention. The gates of Hades are thick, and we give them all the details we can to here's how the quickest way to set up your phone. So we give them a lot of tangible stuff too, so that they don't spend months getting discouraged by it. So we want to both say, yes, this is going to discourage you, and it's going to be irritating. Here's the theological map for that, and here's the website links for it. So you can get money paid on your line. You can do collect calls so that you can hear each other's voice, so that you can go in and have a terrible cheeseburger in the visiting room and get to know your friend more face to face. And then it goes into planning housing and delegating different roles on the team. So one of the role is DOC in housing. So that person is really looking at housing resources in their area. Maybe that person has a wife locally, or a girlfriend or a mom. Great. So they kind of work with the family members and DOC to make sure that release address is approved and can make good connections with the family. Some people have nothing, and we equip them to be like, start talking to people, get to know your community, know where the Oxford houses are, go meet the person who runs Oxford House and find out what the application process is, set up an on the phone interview. So that's a housing person. Another person, we equip them to start doing like navigating health systems. So learning about, will they need helping them set up their insurance, their state insurance, but even then there's a lot of hoops to jump through. And will they need to talk with their DOC officer ahead of time? Will they need to do mental health evaluations, chemical dependency evaluations? How do they pay for that? And putting that plan together and then walking them through a lot of those things, not only for their own care, especially like getting your meds when people have mental health needs, but also they can be violating their parole if they're not complying with sometimes mental health or chemical dependency.
Speaking of parole, how involved are you with the parole officer?
Another role that someone starts working through, and we have a whole module to walk them through. So that way everyone isn't trying to do everything, but we can start to divide it up. Which person is kind of the specialist that's working on it, learning on it, and will accompany them through. Another one is finances and employment, of getting to know different employers in the area. But we say, starting with your church, don't go to the temp labor place downtown. Those are the crumbs. You guys have the real loaf of bread in your community. You have real relationships at better jobs. Here's how you can start learning about what career they want. If they want the trades, you go connect with people at the local union. And people get excited about this. Like, I can do this. I can do this. And so in folks in prison, like, they write me like, Chris, holy shit. Like, I've got like a team of experts, like very competent aunts and uncles that like know people and they know how to speak on my behalf.
Mm.
So that's a
So
lot
you're
of it.
helping them find resources and you're helping them learn that they are a resource. I mean, it sounds to me like you're really kind of opening that church up in a way that they may not have been thinking this is going to open us up.
Totally. You walk with one person out of the underground of your community and you'll get a lay of the kind of cartography of your community, the systems you didn't know were there, the sometimes heroic nonprofits that are right around the corner of a great transitional house or a wonderful nonprofit. And so they start allying with those local neighborhood nonprofits they never knew about.
All right. Yeah, I want to go back to one thing that I think is something that we talk a lot about, and that is character transformation. How do you guys see that in the process? And when do you start to sort of like look at issues that somebody is going to have to deal with, and how do you help your team, your church teams, your parish start to bore into a little bit on the issues of character? And this might trip you up. This might be a problem. I mean, how direct, how indirect, how do you deal with character issues?
Well, the template, I've avoided naming it till now. The kind of narrative template that we follow is the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead and gathering a local community to participate in the drama of resurrection. The three movements are this: Lazarus is Jesus's friend, the F word again. Mm-hmm. And Jesus is heartbroken that someone's in the tombs and he wants to undo the whole affair, which is weird. Most people just accept death. Most people just accept incarceration. But when you love one person in the tombs, you want to undo the whole thing and crack open the tombs. So if prison, mass incarceration in America are the mass tombs, we join into God's friendship with the person on the inside. Mm-hmm. You might be thinking, yeah, but where does the transformation of, I'm just going to say Lazarus, how do we transform Lazarus's character? And the story we have is that he starts to come alive in there, a divine awakening of Jesus raising him from the dead, of him coming awake. Many people through all different spiritual experiences on their own, chaplaincy programs, books they're reading, so many people are having their own various fits and starts of coming alive in prison. I think there's all sorts of programs that involve spiritual awakening, maturity, healing, character. But then what if Lazarus woke up in the tombs and the stone wasn't rolled away? We invite people to ask. Most people say they'd feel panicked, scared, maybe even wanting to go back to being dead. And that's been my experience, that I think a lot of folks, character transformation is beginning organically or through all sorts of wonderful programs inside the prison tombs. But without the hope of relationship, friendship, mutuality, love, trust, that character transformation and that spiritual transformation, it's stillborn and it dies. But when there's a community growing away the stone and you see hope and you can walk out into that light, and there's a community that can get to know you and walk with you, I think character transformation happens in relationship. I think it's kind of the New Testament understanding of community, that we don't just have an individualistic change and then we go act that change. It's kind of our Western European Cartesian understanding of the human person. My wife's a therapist, and little children, their character and their sense of self and their sense of wholeness and their own goodness, and them being even knowing what their needs are, is all developed through empathy and safety and human connection. A child with their parents, and then the village and the community. And so I found that it's very much similar with the folks that I've worked with coming out of prison for years, is that oftentimes as little kids, they never even got the basics of just basic character development, of seeing their own goodness reflected to them and being in a safe environment where they can handle their big feelings. So many men I'm working with who have been numbing their feelings with meth and violence and sex for years, they're at the same level of emotional development as my 8-year-old. And so oftentimes that character development happens in relationships that can mirror back, hey, you're safe, we got you. Oh wow, that is terrible what just happened. You got thrown in the hole and your grandma died and the person on your tier got stabbed yesterday. That sounds terrifying. They've never had someone just say, whoa, like you would say to a kid who falls in scripts, that's scary, how are you? I think there's a lot of healing and basic character development happens in compassionate relationships.
Thank you. That's nicely said. We only have just a couple of minutes because I know there are people here that are going to want to ask you questions, but I got to ask you this, and that is, how do you keep track of all the inmates and parishes in your program? And kind of with that, what data points are you guys tracking? Because I did meet your data guy.
That's great. So this is new. As we've wanted to apply for grants, I think grants are great because they make you get your shit together. Be like, what exactly you're trying to do? Spare us all the lovely stories and rhetoric. What are you trying to accomplish? How are you going to do it? By when? And how are you going to measure it? We're like, oh gosh. So they came, both the metrics and the team to organize this came together. The grants have given us some money to hire folks. There's a former pastor who did One Parish One Prisoner, who kind of burnt out of being a pastor, but he also had a marketing pass, so he's perfect. So he's in both equipping churches and building with someone we hired this kind of database through a program I really recommend called Airtable. It's really beautiful, of building files for all the churches we're courting. We're kind of almost like a sales job, right? Here's the churches we're having contacts with and warm touches and inviting them to the next step. And then we've got all these applications coming in from prison, and their key data is getting plugged into our kind of like prison reentry Tinder, of like or eHarmony, of pairing them together. And then once they launch, some of the metrics that we're measuring are, how do we measure faithfulness? So how do our measurement tools even line up with what we're saying in that second module? So we're even looking at 3 months, 6 months, 12, 18, whatever, 24, some basic data points we build in at the bottom of all of our modules for the team to like check if they're true or if they're happening. Like if anyone has left the team, if they're still in touch, how many touch points they've had that month. And I used to think that they would hate the bean counting, but teams love it. I think teams love checking boxes. People love being like, yes, we did it. Yes, we did that. How many phone calls do we have? And the bean counting, I think, actually helps them feel the concreteness of what they're doing. And so touch points, faithfulness, relationship. One of the things we're measuring now is rupture and repair.
How do you measure that?
Also because I'm married to a therapist, the relationships grow only insofar as they've gone through rupture and repair. Marriages that try to stay in the honeymoon phase are either become panic-driven, hollow performances that are very lonely. But I think trust grows and transformation grows when we can fuck up, when we can drop the ball, when we can say our mind and there's a fight and someone storms out and we find ways of coming back together. And so we're learning how to put that language more into the modules, and then on their kind of like quarterly kind of questionnaire, like, have you gone through a process of rupture and repair? By then they know what that means. And they can say yes or no and just share a short story. So part of it's qualitative, and we're hearing stories about like, well, they were arrested, and instead of panicking, we waited for their call, or some person we know their girlfriend, and we let them know we're praying for them. And the girlfriend says they never would have reached out. They would have been so ashamed. But just hearing that, they called and they said, I'm so sorry. And they break down weeping on the phone. The team says, we love you. We don't know what to do next. We're new at this, but we're here for you, buddy. And then they begin to repair a new journey together instead of like, oh, well, that was a failed investment, and all the kind of lousy quitter scripts we have. And then the person getting out says, why are you going with what the cops say? Like, my mom lives in that town. I don't care what they fucking say. Why are you guys controlling me? People have tried to control me my whole life. Hang up. They don't talk for a few weeks. That's rupture. And then the team finding a way of, instead of them going into total alarm, them learning how to breathe, self-regulate, wait for repair and resurrection and forgiveness, and come back together. Then now they love each other. Those are the people that the photos they send after that, when they finally pick them up, their heads are leaning together. The photos are different. They trust each other. They've gone through a little shit together. They've broken trust and repaired trust. So that's one of our metrics as well.
Wow, what's a beauty. So here's my last question for you. What are your goals for expansion? What are you doing to expand?
So it's taken years to develop these networks with churches around Washington State, and about like 8 or 9 different denominations, different counties, applications coming in from different prisons now. So we've gotten some interest thanks to, cool webinars and podcasts and national magazines. It's been trickling in from around the country for several years, but we've always thought, I don't know how to do that. But then some folks in Chicago last year reached out and they said, no, really, we need to do this. We're a nonprofit that's connected to the Catholic Archdiocese. We do reentry. We have in-reach into all these different folks going through the Cook County, which is the largest jail in America. And they all go out into the Illinois prison system, but like 80% of people in the Illinois prison system are coming back to Chicago anyway. So we have prisoners, we have lots of parishes where we can be the connector. We need to do this. So we're learning how. This year we've been going out to Chicago and really spending time talking with Lutheran leaders, Catholic leaders, Presbyterian leaders, figuring out how it works and how to fund at least one full-time person that can put it all together. We can't do it from remotely from Washington. We need someone on the ground who knows Chicago, knows the churches, knows the racial and economic and historical landscape. It's so relational. And then we just last week got back from Central Texas because we've had similar level of interest from Austin and San Antonio. And so we're learning how to lay the groundwork, and I could do our 3-hour slideshow on how we actually put those pieces together, but we're learning.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Chris. I'm gonna sort of turn this over to folks that are sitting there probably wanting to ask you a few questions that I didn't ask or get some clarity. So anybody out there want to say something to Chris or Bonnie? Got your hand up.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so very much. One of the things that I've believed for a long time that you brought out is that we as adults are just children inside. And it's how to communicate at whatever level they are without being impatient, because they've got adult problems that go back to the childhood. As a chaplain, you've got these people that are male bodies that are mature, but they're adolescent inside.
Or younger.
Or younger, right. And I had a lot of tears. But I find when they get out, they're really they're still having all these, they've grown a lot and they've learned to love and the importance of relationships, but they still have to learn how to handle responsibilities, which they've missed out on in their adolescent life.
Yeah.
And how do you incorporate that? What if you go to the Bible, where do you go? I love the Lazarus. I think that's a great model for thought. But I'm just interested in your other thoughts about how do they. Maybe it's the woman who was caught in the act of sin, and everybody was.
Oh, sure. I think. Well, yeah. Let me actually go back to Lazarus. You reminded me. I didn't finish it. There's relationship with the one who is coming alive in the tombs. There's rolling away the stones, which is our metaphor for all the heavy social work stuff and the different roles of structural barriers. It doesn't feel like spiritual work. It doesn't feel like changing the person, but their hope and their almost like a child coming out of the womb, someone coming out of the tombs, and they can only develop if they can get out. And so we need to roll away heavy structures. But then thirdly, Lazarus comes out like a mummy, right? All bound up in the preservation death garments. And Jesus doesn't say, take that off, or if you're really coming alive, show us. That metaphor being all the self-preserving defense mechanisms of gangs, misogyny, addiction, immaturity, lying, all the things that have protected them since they were little, and especially in the darkness. Jesus tells the community, unbind him.
That's right.
And I love this because he doesn't say, Lazarus, you need to change. It's about, in the contemplative tradition, Thomas Merton and other kind of Catholic contemplatives talk about, we're not being transformed, actually. We're actually coming home to our true selves who God already made. And we're learning how to, we're learning how to shed the false self, is what Merton says. And in that way, we're still trapped inside our false selves, which are normally our protective mechanisms.
Right, right.
And so I think a lot of the transformation, quote unquote, is a lot of learning how to be unbound by one another, where we say, I see you under there. I know you just raged and said something really mean, but I see you, buddy. And when people feel seen, they're willing to let go of the false stuff. And you'd be surprised how many church folks have their own layers. They're just prettier layers. How many folks are dying of loneliness inside, or their real vibrance and sense of humor is stilted underneath these kind of like very, I don't know, shallow and pleasing layers that they have, and they become unbound, and their sense of humor and their rawness and their wounds are revealed. And so that's kind of our angle. I think that when people belong to one another and they feel seen, and their true selves and their true wounds can be uncovered together, I think that's where we heal and where we can mature or develop, all of us. And so I think that's where the character transformation, the drug addiction healing, the mental health care, and the trauma informed practices are all kind of possible in that framework for us.
Thank you.
Great question, Bonnie.
Chris, you said that your program is 24 months. Is that from the start of the first interaction, or is that 24 months after the person gets out? How do you measure that? And do you have a sense of, like, in a way, graduation, or is it kind of what you were saying, like the ultimate success is that you have a long-term true relationship with that community of people who's been doing this work together?
Yeah, great questions. So the 24 months, the 2 years, generally straddles the release date right down the middle. And so we try to pair all the preparation work and recruiting the church and building the team on one hand, and then getting the applications from the incarcerated folks and pairing them. Hopefully all that happens no later than 1 year before the release date. Once a team hasn't been launched and we've got an applicant and they're like 9-10 months from the gate, we've learned we have to write a very sad letter in saying, we're so sorry we couldn't pair you. We've tried to be like, well, something's better than nothing. It's a shit show. We found that they know just enough to mess it up, hurt each other, be confused, that they need about a year to build relationship and build a reentry plan to do it well. And then the second half of the second 12 learning modules are generally early reentry accompaniment and problem solving and employment and housing and all that, and faithfulness and repair. And what happens when they disappear or relapse? What happens when everything goes bad and it's not the story we wanted? And there's some of the bigger kind of like macro reflections towards the end about reimagining incarceration in America, kind of like more of a almost abolitionist primer. And then the last module is called, Is This Just the Beginning? Where we say, was this really just the prologue to a much larger journey of healing and change in your lives and what relationships can be? Is there a graduation? No, but we do want to get better at giving them kind of like a capstone reflection where we can kind of like come in and we get to kind of hear stories and they get to tell stories and tell stories to their own congregation and celebrate a little bit or grieve a little bit and learn together. So we want to get better at formalizing that inflection point.
And thanks for sharing about that timeline, because I would have thought the same probably initially, like, well, yeah, 10 months, 6 months would be better than 0. And we've certainly had people that we've worked with on very short notice on occasion, and it's sort of like, okay, like let's go. Is the same true of the number of people that you ask for participation in a church to sort of work with this? Is 7 a magical number, or is it a minimum, or is it?
Yeah, when we launched 6 or 7 years ago, our first pilots, I said 5. I mean, it was off the top of my head, but I'm like, anything more than that, maybe it's like too many cooks in the kitchen. And there's, you can only have like so many pen pals before you're writing the same thing back and forth. And then if it's too small, it's just a lot of work, and people can feel kind of lonely, and that there's just a lot of work to do. But when I launched 5, I wasn't factoring in attrition. So as much as we build in faithfulness and practices, someone flakes off, and we actually want there to be a reckoning around that and a hard conversation, but it's kind of inevitable, unfortunately. And so if you start with 5, you're really down to 3 after about a year. And if you start with 7, down to 5, that's much better. So that team, even though there's been a little bit of a loss, they're not crushed by the amount of work to do. So we say 7 to 10 now, more than 10, and there's truly too many cooks in the kitchen.
I've been just hanging on every word. I think Chris's program is amazing, phenomenal, wonderful. Just I'm blown away. So is one of those 5 people the pen pal that writes, or do they all write different letters?
Yeah, they're all writing letters.
They're all writing individual letters, and then is the person, we could say Lazarus, is he then writing to each one of the committee members, each one? So
yeah, they're writing to all their team members. Sometimes they'll be like, man, there's a lot of y'all to catch up with, or hey, there's so much going on the tier this week. Karen, what I just told you, can you just read that to the team? And I'm reading all your guys' letters, but I can't get back to them. But I want to say something. So
he
yeah,
might send one letter back, and then it's read, maybe.
Yeah, but we let them figure that out. All of them are.
Okay.
We let them figure that out, because they have their own relationships. They get to know each other. But then also, as I was describing a little bit ago, they have, as we get beyond just relationship building into reentry planning, they'll be working on different things. They'll be like, I'm working with Chad on my housing stuff, and I've got my call with Sally on Saturday afternoons, and we're working on lining up my health insurance. And so
so they're all communicating with him about different stuff, about the stuff they've individually been researching or working on.
Yep. And the team meets once a month. We have like an even format for what that team meeting includes, because it's got to include a lot of stuff. So from stillness and prayer together, which we haven't talked about, our kind of welcoming prayer and spiritual stance of letting go of control, to discussing the learning module they read together, to catching up with some collaborating, and here's what's coming up, and we need to be thinking about this, and I need some help with this. There's a number of things that they work on together in that meeting. And then eventually they start having a text thread together, and the team is all texting and talking about stuff. And soon, now that they have a text thread, they have a closer group of friends than even their golf buddies or their women's Bible study. And they're checking in and finding a community throughout the week that they've never had before.
And I hate to ask this, but does it ever be that that an inmate asks to be replaced with a different church? Like, no, the bond is strong.
I mean, it's interesting that you're asking that. I'm like, oh, that's never come up, and no one's asked that. But it seems like it'd be a reasonable question. But whoa, I'm surprised. Yeah, no one's ever said my team sucks, give me a new one. Which would be would not be a dumb, unheard of thing to say, but yeah, I haven't heard it.
That's great.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, do you exchange your
I
friends,
mean-
meet in college and ask for a better group. Like, it's just kind of the cards you're dealt, and you build relationships.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, those are good questions, though, Rachel. I'm gonna be thinking about that. At the very least, to make a joke more often, to be like, hey, if you know you're gonna be fired by your person on the inside unless you guys step up.
Let's go to Heather and then James.
Chris, I have to say I'm in awe of the work that you do. Thank you so much for your commitment to this cause. Creating love, giving love is the most important thing in the world. I'm currently a corresponding chaplain, and I just want to be clear. When I write a letter, I send it, well, it goes to the individual, the inmate, but that inmate's letter then is addressed to the return address, which is a state address, a clearinghouse, if you will, that the inmate doesn't have my home address nor a phone number. And you were talking about exchanging letters and phoning. Are you giving personal information out? I'm just would like to be clear on that.
Yeah. So with the way One Parish One Prisoner works is, yeah, they're plugged in direct relationship. There's no kind of like clearinghouse or redirecting center of their communications. They're like a friend or a neighbor, writing letters and taking calls. Sometimes folks on their first letter, they're a little bit hesitant. They're like, I'm writing a letter to someone I don't even know in a prison with a felony record. And we say in the kickoff orientation and in the early letter module, if you feel hesitant about putting your family's home address on it, we encourage you to use your church, because we work with churches. I mean, if we're going to be working with non-churches soon, some other like a PO box or something, or community center, so that's fine. But oftentimes, I don't know, 1 out of 10 people do that.
Yeah.
And then when they do, after about like a month or two, they're like, there's just trust. And like, oh yeah, I forgot. I hate going to the church to get my letter. Like, just mail me at home, because they know each other a little better now.
And that's never caused a problem. You've never experienced problems with that. Okay. Okay, great.
Which is cool, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense in many ways. It really does.
One of the things I've been suspicious about, but I think we've been right, is when there's a power in a team. A lot of people who want to write folks who are locked up or do caring work are unhealthy, codependent people like me, and with some boundary issues, and I can get played. I'm just a sucker. I've been doing this work for 20 years with gang affected folks, and I still have people on my team that are just like, Chris, that dude's bullshitting you. I'm just like, no. They'll be like, Chris, like, no. But when I was operating as a lone wolf, that's when I could really get manipulated. But when I'm like, hey, welcome to the team, and hey, I have this relationship, this person can serve you, you just can't play a team as easily as you can play one needy person.
Yeah.
Like me. And so I found that a lot of the problems with like one-on-one pen pal stuff, I think they should be protected. But when someone comes into this knowing there's a team and they're all talking about the relationship together, manipulation flees. And people are very careful and very caring when they know there's a whole, not only do they feel more loved, but you can't bullshit 7 people that are meeting together monthly.
Yeah. Thank you. Good point. Thank you again.
James.
Hey, Chris, this has been wonderful. I love, as someone else said, the use of Lazarus' experience as a metaphor. I just love that. That I'm basically want to know how to get a hold of you, because you talked about podcasts. I'd like to talk to you about being a guest on my podcast at some point. So what's the best way to get a hold of you?
My email is chris@undergroundministries.org.
Okay, Chris at Underground. Great, thank you. I'll be in touch.
Cool. Looking forward to it, James.
This has been awesome.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, James has a very well, a reasonably popular Bible study podcast that he has been doing for quite well.
Oh man, give me your Bible geeks. I haven't led Bible studies for so many years in jail, and I miss it. Get me going on the Bible, man.
Okay. Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
I'll be in touch.
Okay.
Is one of it, how do you deal with like requests for money or things like that that are made possibly from the person before they are released from prison? Is that
Yep.
encouraged? Is it discouraged? Is it up to the individuals?
Yeah, it's in the kickoff orientation, and it's module number 4 or 5, which is while they're incarcerated, sorry y'all, no money. And we lay out why, and especially the incarcerated people oftentimes understand, because oftentimes it's our incarcerated partners that are just like feel very protective of the team members. Like, I don't want anyone, just because they see it all the time. They see how people find one person out there that they don't want to be callous. They don't want to use that one pen pal. But when you're in prison, there's no access to resources to get a book, to get some music on your tablet, to get some snacks that don't taste like the cafeteria. When we say we know that you could use some more money, but we're building something really precious here, which is relationships of trust. And for that reason, we don't want any manipulation to come involved. And so the team will the only reason the team will use money is for phone calls. And we even dial it in saying, when you go to this, shitty software, don't put it on their account, put it on your phone number. And so every team member does that. So every person's doing maybe $2 or $3 a month max. So we want to use resources to open up relationship, so it's never transactional. But we tell the team, if you're feeling guilty about how rich you are and this person's poor, don't worry, we're going to start fundraising. And we hyperlink to the welcome home learning module, where your church is going to need to raise between $5,000 to $7,000, because we want you to be able to pay at least 3 months rent, depending on the state or the county. We're going to need to pay for driver's license fees and tests and hygiene and clothing and shoes. Like, rolling away the stone is expensive. So you're going to need those shekels. Just don't make it part of the relationship now. And normally teams get it.
Do the teams make sure that the inmate has the necessary documentation that's not going to screw them up if they don't have a birth certificate? You guys?
So that's the ID and driver's license role. Mm-hmm. And so that person is starting those conversations with them months before release. Some people say, yeah, I've got an ID, I've got my driver's license, it's in my property bag. Some people are like, I've never had a driver's license, which is more common. And Washington State is making some real advances in this area. But when I first started doing this, guys would be released without an ID and without a social security card. And so it would be months of me driving around with guys and trying to email Rio Grande Valley, Texas, to find the Department of Health to get a birth certificate mailed up here with a notarized thing from the bank, to play that kind of game of one form of ID to then get another form, to then, you need 3 forms of ID to get this thing, to get a social security card. Now Washington State is finally helping folks get a social security card before the release. And so we help one person start that way ahead of time. It's really easy to work on it while they're locked up. It's so hard to do that in their first weeks of release.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
What is it do you have to get notarized for the ID for them? I've got an inmate that's out now that's having a problem.
Oh,
it has to be notarized.
Well, I mean, if we were wanting to get a birth certificate from another state and we need to fax some request, notarizing is one of many identity checks, right? That we would go with them into a local bank and get this letter notarized and faxed over to some health department in Texas that can be like, okay, we'll mail you because we know we're not being scammed. It's really the person. It's just dreadful to put together the hard pieces of civic identity in America if you don't have them.
Yeah.
Are these letters, are they all physical letters, or are they also using the electronic systems, or do they have those in Washington?
Yeah, another good question. So in that letter writing, the lost art of letter writing, the first module, we say, you will learn very soon about whether it's Securus or JPay or some of these terrible prison email bloodthirsty corporations. You'll learn about those soon enough. For the first month or two, we want you to go old school. Get that piece of paper out. There's something so human and basic and not intimidating by getting a pen of your choice out and a piece of paper, stationer of your choice out, just writing a letter. I mean, you know, those softwares can be intimidating, especially for some older retired age folk. Just write a letter. You know how to do this. And there's something very human when you see someone's handwriting. It's like hearing somebody's voice, you know, it's human. And so we say eventually after 2 or 3 months, it's normally the folks on the inside that are like, hey, I don't have paper or stamps, even though we say put some money on their postage account. It's just so much easier. Everyone in here has a tablet. Can you just get on my JPay or get my Securus? And we say, if you've written 5 letters, go for it. If you haven't, write a letter. Yeah, because it becomes very efficient, very quick. You can check your app or whatever and do all that. It's very expedient, but we ask them for the first month or two to lean into old school epistolary relationships.
Nice. Rachel, your hands up.
I just feel so like this would be so cool to pair together, to do what we could to see how much we could I mean, learn more deeply from your organization, and because it feels like there's so many parallels.
Yes, I forget how we came across it. Or you reached out to us first, right, David?
Yep, we did.
Yeah.
One of the people on the call tonight, Susan, actually brought you to our attention, and as soon as we found you, we were like, oh my gosh, that's very similar in many ways to what we're doing, but also a little more developed in certain aspects that I think the things you've been sharing tonight are really awesome. And I think giving us a lot of things to chew on as far as like how we approach this work as well. One question I also have for you, in terms of the churches that you're working with, what would you say like the range of size of like congregants is? I mean, are these all really big churches? Are some of them really, really small? Does it just vary?
Yeah, all across the map. We found that big churches, small churches are awesome because they're not busy. And just because the church is small doesn't mean the character of those people is small. And sometimes there's some really beautiful, wise people that have a reason to be fiercely committed to each other, even though their church is small and shitty. You know what I mean? Like they were never there for the cool music or the fancy pastor. They've been there because they know how to be faithful to one another.
Well, also just a quick question. What to you is a small church?
I mean, like the small one I'm thinking about right now is like a rural Methodist church that Sunday attendance is 8.
Okay, cool.
Or the Unitarian Universalist church, and they're all like retired hippies, and there's like 12 of them. And they argue with each other with a smile about whether they want to use the word God or not.
Mm-hmm.
But they all know that they want to do good in the world, and then they're quiet. it's just like a rainbow flag Quakers. They're great. But so sometimes like a large Jesuit, the biggest ones we've seen is like a large Jesuit cathedral in Seattle, very leftist, very progressive, very educated, or like a large megachurch, normally very right wing, electric guitars, very fancy, well branded slides. Both of those churches have the same problem, that they don't know each other very well, that the church is very impressed with itself normally, and the church is the congregants are very impressed that they belong to an impressive organization, and normally they're not as interested in the broken, even though that's on their values, both leftists and evangelicals. We want to reach the lost, we want to do social justice, but then actually doing the work, normally they want an exception, like, hey, we know this program is great, but I belong to St. James, or I go to, Life Rock Central or whatever. And normally there's not as much humility, or maybe you put a team together, but the congregation isn't along for the ride. So the team is very lonely because it's very hard to get into the mucky mucks messaging decision rooms of what is shared on a Sunday morning. It's a very polished operation, either evangelical or Catholic. So those are some of the liabilities. And it takes 3 years to get a meeting with the pastor to greenlight the thing.
Chris, how many non-Christian churches are you working with?
Working with
churches, mosques. I mean, how many temples? How many?
Yeah, we're working with our first 2 Jewish congregations in Seattle, and I refashioned all of our modules out with I kind of created a parallel website or web page, and it took out all the Lazarus narrative arc from it and the resurrection icons. And just me, because I'm a Bible geek, I'm just thinking about how central the Exodus narrative is, at least in that shared narrative we have with our Jewish brothers and sisters. And I reframed it through let my people go, and the relationship of the divine insisting on exit from death and captivity, and then the plagues as pushing against this economy and this system and these walls, and then them moving out quickly upon release, and then all the barriers they face in the Red Sea, which I'm like, the more I had to do this, I'm like, gosh, this is the same narrative. And then the Red Sea is like the gates of Hades, like Red Sea in Hebrew is really like death, like sea is Yam, and it's really like the kind of like Abyssinian gods of death, that they're splitting, that like Yahweh is like splitting open the barriers of death so that the people can enter a promised land. So it's neat to kind of like just put a different narrative arc, but a lot of it tangibly is the same stuff of letters and relationships and driver's licenses, etc. I'm not sure how that would work. We're open to dancing with folks with different traditions, but we have to live within our story, not just our ideal. So when those relationships come and knocking, and people want to dance together, we can modify the dance music a little bit.
Would you say on your website, the next steps page that you've got is a good starting point for people to digest this a little bit more?
Just oneparishoneprisoner.org, sorry, is like the basics. Next, so then the 2 calls to action at the bottom of that page are an interest form, so people can just be on our radar and we can know where to direct the conversation. And then secondly is that points them to the next steps, which we call approaching the tomb. So that's kind of our soup to nuts for a church going from I'm interested to launching a team. And there's 5 very key steps that kind of guide an interested congregation into doing everything into actually launching.
Because I took a peek at your form, and it's like, all right, are you committed? Right? It's like, let's go. And I think that that's really helpful that you lay that out. I was impressed immediately upon like looking at your site and your media and the videos and everything that you've produced. How much of that is this the first version we're seeing, or is this like a few versions in kind of some of that messaging? Like, did this sort of spring from the hole from the cloth, as they say, or is it?
I mean, we did our first video in 2020, so it's not that long ago. We've kept working and kind of like created more videos. Like now, all 24 learning module pages all have their own video, which is basically like I did an interview with like 18 different people, like an hour-long interview on 24 different topics, and then my videographer and I like spliced together 5 or 6 responses to that topic at the head of each learning module. So yeah, the video and kind of stuff is kind of new. A lot of it has come together really quickly, but I think it came together, I don't know, like a plant grows, the roots the plant is growing underground for a long time before something finally breaks the surface and shoots up. So I think a lot of my theological reflection on it, my learning how to do reentry, and I think I'd just been doing it for so long that when I was finally had some teams to mess with, and that Squarespace, I think, is a great website platform with a non-website geek like me can pull up a page and start writing copy. I mean, I got a writing degree, not a divinity degree, so I can do that. I think it's all come together pretty quickly.
Awesome.
I think that embraced fully angel teams should all be encouraged to sign up and then participate in the module, because we could learn so much. There's so much of the angst, the angel team angst, could be answered by learning these methods. That's what I think.
One other question: do you have like a waiting list of inmates that are waiting for somebody?
Yeah, in Washington State, we have about 90 right now. And we're going to pair and launch about 5 teams before Christmas, which is a fast clip for us.
How many folks are on your team again?
On my staff?
Yeah.
Well, half of our staff is our local work with gang affected folks that I need to go join the next room and for a presentation we're doing. That's Underground Healing, our local gang affected work, which is kind of our foundation. One Parish One Prisoner, the other half of what we do is kind of, everything we're talking about tonight that mobilizes that work with the faith communities. We have about 3 full-time One Parish One Prisoner staff, in addition to me as the director and kind of our admin and development.
Thank you. And I met some of your folks there.
Yeah,
Great folks too.
they're pretty cool.
Yep.
If they're doing this work, they've got a story and a good reason to be in it. They're not random hires.
And the local work you're doing sounds a lot like, or from first glance, it sounds like Cafe Momentum. Have you heard of them in Dallas?
Mm.
I mean, I don't know about your program, but it sounds like another whole Zoom interview. Because I'd love to learn about that.
I wish
too.
I could have us all walk down the hall and hear our staff that are going through a lot of slides and stories about the connections between migrant and farm worker childhoods and racism and poverty and getting kicked out of high schools and how gangs form and their generational healing now and going back as former gang members home from prison, doing their own healing and community work, and now going back into high schools to do intervention and trauma-informed work with gang-affected kids before they're kicked out by their high schools to the streets. They're doing some pretty awesome work.
That's terrific.
Do you have any kind of a gathering of the people who have been through these programs? You know, the 70 individuals that have gone through the One Parish One Prisoner. Do you do any like group like affiliation for them? Or is it just they're all on their own individual journeys?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. We've been surprised how many folks feel so cozy with their teams. They don't, when we've tried, their guards kind of go up when they're around other formerly incarcerated folks, which is interesting to me. I thought they'd be like, fine, finally we can speak to each other, and I got to deal with all these churchy normies over here, cake and coffee, whatever. But now, dog, we can be real. But I've been surprised how many of them feel like, what's up? Like, hi. They'll be at like a mini conference we hold, and they know the shared story, but I think they know so many folks who have been in and out before. They're not dying to know someone with lived experience. They're kind of like, everyone I know in my networks have lived experience. Like, these people over here are a different kind of relationship. So I'm surprised that I don't hear them saying, I have this need. Please connect me with other people who've done this program. I've never met someone who's been in prison before. What we have started doing last year, but we've paused, is wanting to create regional cohorts so that more and more teams can be in a learning community with one another, and so that they can encourage one another and help recruit more of their, instead of just through, you know, Lutherans reaching out to Lutherans in the synod, or Presbyterians to other Presbyterians. Oftentimes a lot of pastors are closer with interdenominationally other pastors in their town, just with civic gatherings or pastors lectionary reading Bible groups or whatever. And so we want that kind of hub of shared practices to grow. But that was going to be year 2 of our 5-year Lilly grant plan. But then this Texas and Chicago thing kind of took off, and building a new website. So we're not going to try to build regional cohorts or pilot those until, I don't know, 2026 or something.
I just want to say thank you, Chris, for coming on and taking the time. And I know you had a little emergency you had to deal with, and I'm so glad you could be here. And I think everybody else is pretty glad you could be here.
I'm so grateful for the work that you all do. I'm so grateful for you loving folks coming home from prison. I'm so grateful for the divine mystery spark spirit that is no one's copyright, that is wanting to help us come together and love people coming out. I'm grateful for your humility and your honor to come up here, David, and to talk shop and learn from one another, and to create more conversations with your people here. And I mean, normally I'm talking with folks that have no idea what this is, so we have to move really slowly, but to kind of speak as fellow nerds together doing this kind of work, it's really cool. So thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, and thanks for taking the time, Chris.
Yep.
I trust we'll be in touch.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
I hope you can come to our conference.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good night, friends.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.